Hello and welcome back to Slim Does Tech. In this quick video we're going to have a quick look at how to troubleshoot a slow computer. So slowness is something that people complain about with computers all the time, especially as their computers age. They tend to slow down as time goes on. And this is a fact of the physical hardware within a computer. It can degrade over time and eventually run slower. But in most cases, it's just the fact that the computer has been in use for a long time and there's a lot of probably unnecessary software installed and services running in the background that take up your computer's precious resources, which then leaves less for what you want to do on the computer, which then appears to you, the user, as slowness. So we're going to take a quick look at how to disable these services that aren't needed, cleaning up on old software that you don't need anymore, and some quick tips on how to determine what is causing your computer to appear slow, and some questions you can ask to, once you get the answers, will then give you a troubleshooting path to resolve the issue. So the very first thing we're going to look at is determining, is your computer slow? Or is it your internet connection that's slow? Or is it just that you're trying to do something that takes a long time and you're impatient? Whatever the case may be, our first point of call here is going to be the task manager. The quickest way to get to the task manager is usually to right click a blank area of the taskbar down here. You might notice I don't have a blank area of the taskbar down there, but there are some keyboard shortcuts you can use. You can use Control, Shift and Escape. Will launch the task manager directly, or the most common one is Control, Alt and Delete, and then choose task manager from the menu here. Once you're into the task manager, as mentioned in the previous video, if it looks like this, click on more details. And from here, you should get a quick overview of what your computer is doing. So in the processes tab, which it loads to by default, you can see how hard your computer is running, or how hard your CPU is running, and how much of the CPU is being used by each individual app and background process that are running. You can also see how much memory is being used. Disk and network and GPU and those sorts of things, we don't really need to concern ourselves with these too much in the case of troubleshooting a slowness problem, whereas disk might be the only one to keep an eye on. If that's at 100%, there's a problem. Look through the list, or even better, click the disk heading here to arrange by that particular column, and then you can see what is using up the disk. You then have the option to either right click and end that task if possible, or investigate further to see why it's using so much disk resource. So back to our default view here, we can see at the moment that this particular computer, my computer, is not running slow. So in the situation where this computer is running slow, you will generally see one of these two numbers approaching 100%. That's CPU usage and memory usage. Once either of those reaches or nears 100%, anything that you try to do, whether that be opening a new application, opening a website in a web browser, clicking a link to another site, even accessing your start menu, or doing anything on the computer at all, if there are no CPU or memory resources available, whatever action you're trying to perform will be queued. And whatever is currently using those CPU resources will take place first, and your queued action will take place later. That means it will be slower for you. It will appear as though your computer is laggy, or when you click something, the action takes a while to happen, or just a general slowness. It can appear in a number of different ways, but the CPU and memory numbers here are what to look for. Again, if one of these is almost maxed out, you're going to encounter problems. And what do you do about it? Well, the easiest thing to do is click the column header and determine what it is that's using up all those resources on your computer. As you can see, this computer is not running slow, but if it was, one of these would be at a high percentage. Not necessarily 90 or 100, but maybe anything over 50. And the way computers work, which I won't go into in detail, but the CPU usage should be a low number. Now, it depends on your CPU, how powerful it is, how many cores it has, etc. But when the computer is not actually doing anything, that number should be low. and should stay low. When you then perform an action, such as clicking the start button to open the start menu, the CPU usage should spike as it performs that action and then return back to its previous level. Even though the start menu is still open, the CPU usage is leveled out because it has performed the action of opening the start menu. An easier way to see this is by going into the Performance tab here, and you can see usage or CPU activity over the last 60 seconds. And this will show you, as you perform actions, the amount of effort your computer has to expend to complete that action. So let's just say, for instance, that we open an application. So we'll use the Microsoft Store. We click to open the Microsoft Store, and returning back to the CPU page here, you can see our spike here in activity. And now CPU usage will level out, maybe stay a little bit higher than before, but it will level out to a lowish number as the action to open the Microsoft Store has been completed. It's been performed and it's done. So that was our spike, and then it leveled out again. Okay, if CPU usage stays high, it means your computer is not able to complete or finish whatever action it is that it is trying to perform. And that's where we, in the Processes tab here, click on CPU in the column heading here to arrange by CPU usage and find out what it is that's causing that problem. If it's an old, unnecessary piece of software, uninstall it, and we'll be getting to that in a moment. If it's something that you use every day, fine, you might just have to live with it and recognize that your computer might be old and, look at some other things you can do to improve the performance. If it's something that you do not recognize, comment below. That is the best piece of advice I can give you, or search on Google, or ask a techie friend. As I said, comment below. And they will then investigate and find out what that process is and whether it is safe to end it. Memory usage works in very much the same way, except you have in the Performance tab of Task Manager a memory option here. And memory usage is basically how many things your computer is doing right now. So how many programs are loaded into memory, or how much of the memory is being used by the data held within those programs. So for instance, if you're using Excel and you have a very large Excel document, that will use a lot of memory. It's one application, but it will take up more memory because it's a large document that's open. In the case of high memory usage, generally speaking, ending the program is the normal thing to do. If it's an Excel document, chop that Excel document up into smaller pieces or whatever it takes to reduce the memory usage and therefore improve the performance of your computer. You might be thinking at this point, well, I don't understand what all of these things in the Task Manager are and what's safe to end and what's not. As I said, put a comment below or search Google. The name of the application here, plus a term like safe to close, or what is Corsair service.cpu ID remote. And someone somewhere on the internet will have explained that, and you can then do your own research. Always, always do your own research, people. Very important. So moving on from the currently active problem, so a high CPU usage issue, high memory usage issue, we're going to look at more of a kind of an overall slowness. So your computer is slow all of the time. And that's generally caused by either services or background processes which are running, which you may or may not use. In those situations, this startup tab here is your friend. You can see from here what services are due to start on your computer when the computer starts up. That's when you power it on. And you can see here the impact it will have on the startup. That is how long it will impact the startup process, and will it take much longer for your computer to be ready to use after you power it on. In the case of something saying not measured, your computer just doesn't know enough information about that particular process to make a judgment. Anything with a high startup impact, if you don't need it, disable it. Right click, disable. That does not mean that that particular application now will no longer work on your computer. It just means it won't be running by default. And when I say running by default, I mean in the system tray, which is this area in the bottom right of your computer, which shows all of the, not all, but a lot of the background processes and background services that are running on your computer. By disabling something in here in the Startup tab, you are just telling the program or telling your computer to not load that service by default. So when you tell your computer to not run a service by default, all that means is that it won't be running when you need it. So if you rely on things like Microsoft OneDrive for syncing files or whatever the case may be, leave it enabled. Bite the bullet, take the hit to your startup. It's just going to be the way it is. Whereas for certain things like a Java update scheduler, personally, I don't care if Java ever updates on my computer. Once Java works when I need it, I'm happy. So I'll disable that. Going back to OneDrive and similar applications that you may use, these applications can be disabled here in the Startup tab and still used. Okay, what I mean by that is that, for instance, with Steam, I can disable Steam here in Startup, but Steam will still work perfectly fine. It just means that when I go to launch the Steam application from here or anywhere else on the computer, it will maybe take a minute or so longer to actually open because its background service isn't running already. That's all. It will save time on startup. It will also free up certain resources for all those times that I use my computer without using Steam. So in those situations, you may want to disable Steam or Discord, Glorious Core, whatever it might be, all these different applications. These are background services that get installed on your computer the more you use it. And as I alluded to at the beginning of the video, as you use a computer for years and years and years, you will have installed various pieces of software. Those pieces of software will then have been updated, and you will end up with a lot of background services, things that you probably don't use or don't need. In here, in the Startup tab of the Task Manager, is where you go to turn those off. For those of you with older computers that are running a different version of Windows, I think anything from Windows 8 and before that, what you want to do in those situations is in a Run window, which you can open by holding the Windows key on your keyboard and pressing the letter R for Romeo, type msconfig in here and press enter. This will load the system configuration application. This is not something you should mess with unless you know what you're doing. And when I say you know what you're doing, you're following sound technical advice, which I hope to deliver in this video, or you're more experienced, or you've done your own research. Do your own research, people. In the Startup tab, you'll find a similar list to this. You can there choose what starts and what doesn't start when your computer starts up. As you can see here, it's telling me to go to Task Manager because in Windows 11, that's where the options are. In older versions of Windows, this is where you will make those changes. Okay, you're not going to see any of those changes or the impact of any of those changes until you restart your computer. So restart your computer. One very important tip is something a lot of people don't know, but in your Task Manager in the Performance tab, again Windows 10 and up, the uptime here shows you how long the computer has been on. Now this number might look quite odd to some people. In my situation here, my computer has been on just over an hour and 10 minutes, counting up in seconds there. This might show days, 10 days, 20 days. I've seen 120 days on a system here. And that system, that computer was working perfectly fine until it wasn't. And the reason that the uptime hadn't reset was because Microsoft introduced a feature with Windows 10 called Fast Boot. Fast Boot makes your computer start up quicker. It boots faster. Okay, very simple, straightforward idea. But how they accomplished a faster boot time was by not turning your computer off completely when you shut it down. You have a few options in this situation. My personal recommendation would be just restart your computer once in a while, maybe once a week, every fortnight, or as soon as you start having any sort of technical issue whether that be a program crashing, not launching, error messages, or slowness, restart your computer then. Make it your first step in trying to fix the problem. And when you restart the computer, this uptime number here will reset back to 0 and begin counting up again. But it also means that all of the background services and all of the things that are running on your computer are properly closed. If one of those services encountered an error and is taking up a lot of CPU or memory resources that we discussed earlier, a restart will kill the process, free up those resources, and then restart the process when it's needed, whether that be on startup or when you launch the application for the first time after the restart. But a restart, crucial step in the troubleshooting process to fix a slow computer, especially since Windows 10 was introduced. There are options to disable fast boot. I don't recommend it. Just do a restart when you have an issue, or do one every once in a while anyway. Next thing that's a step that will only be applicable to not everybody, but to only certain people out there, is disk defragmentation. Now, that sounds like a very long technical term. Basically what it means is that your hard drive on your computer, or the disk, stores files. And when those files are stored, and then more files are stored after that, and the first files are deleted, it becomes a little bit of a gap in the middle. And then later on, your computer will start to fill those gaps with bits of files. And that means that your drive can become fragmented. There's bits of files in various places on the drive, and it can be slow for the computer to recover all the bits and then reassemble the file. So disk defragmentation is only disk fragmentation, I should say, is only something that will occur after a longer period of time. So it's not going to happen if your computer is just recently repaired or just new bought but is experiencing slowness. It will only affect a computer that's been running for a long time. And when I say running, I mean in use for a number of years. It also is only a problem with older, what are known as spinning hard drives. That is an old mechanical hard drive. Those are the slower, they tend to have a higher capacity, but a much slower speed than today's SSDs. An SSD is solid state storage, which doesn't suffer from fragmentation, whereas a HDD or hard disk drive is magnetic platters. Think of them like an old LP or record, and a read-write head, which can be thought of like the needle on a record player, which moves over the platter to read the bits of the data. And when I say bits of data, I mean the bits of the file that it then has to put together to reassemble the file. And that's what will take a long time. So defragment your disk if you think that might be the problem. There is an analysis tool built in with Windows, which you can run first, which will be a much quicker process, and that should tell you whether a full disk defragmentation will help. To get to these options, you open your File Explorer, right-click your C drive. Your C drive is the drive that Windows will be installed on. You might notice I have some other drives here. It's the C drive, and you can see in this little handy icon there's a Windows icon there, and that shows you that Windows is installed on this. That's your system drive, your boot drive, goes by many different names. That's what we're interested in. We're going to right click on that. We're going to go to Properties. In Properties, go to Tools, and you can optimize and defragment the drive here. I'm not going to perform that now. The process can take a long time. Hours, possibly days, possibly even weeks. But if your disk is heavily fragmented, a defrag will help. Might not solve all your problems, but it will help. You can also check your disk for errors with the disk checking option here, unrelated to this video, but it appears in the Tools tab anyway. So, moving on. If you're experiencing a slowness issue with your computer, but all of what we've discussed so far is not highlighting an obvious problem, such as in the task manager you're not seeing high CPU or high memory usage or even high disk usage, then you may just have a slow connection. Slow internet connection can cause what appears to be a slow computer problem. If you turn on a computer these days with no internet connection, i.e. no wireless and no network cable plugged in, you'll notice that there's very little that you can do, or at least very little that will keep you entertained without an internet connection. The reason for this is that almost everything done on computers these days involves the internet in some way, shape or form, whether that be email, web browsing, gaming, any and all things that people tend to do on the computer these days involves the internet. If your internet is slow, you will notice that as slow performance on your computer, but your computer is not at fault. The issue lies elsewhere. The issue may lie with your internet connection itself. It may lie with the connection from your computer to your home internet or whatever internet you're using. By that I mean, are you using a network cable? Is it old? Is it damaged? Are you using Wi-Fi? If so, what's the signal strength like? Are you close to the router, far away from the router? Are there large electrical appliances or a massive metal wall between you and your router, or 4 foot of concrete? All of these things can affect wireless signal performance and can all be investigated separately. A slow internet connection is maddening. It will cause you to go slightly insane over time if left unchecked. But there are a lot of things that can be done to combat slow internet. First, as I mentioned, wireless signal. You can easily check that by the amount of signal bars you see on the network icon here in the system tray. I'm using a wired connection, so I don't have signal bars, but that's where they would appear. Another good test is to run a ping test. Now, a lot of people will have heard of speed tests, which are fine, but bear in mind a speed test is dependent on the server providing your speed test at the other side. If you don't know where that server is physically located, as in how far away from you it is, or whether it's run by a reputable source, whether it's experiencing difficulties itself, etc., it's not going to be a reliable test. But you can do a ping test. Ping test is a very simple test that your computer can run. We go to the run window again to start the process, and in here we type CMD, short for command or command prompt. Once you've opened the command prompt, I'm using Windows 11, which comes with the Windows terminal, so mine may look slightly different, but the commands are the same and the results will be the same. In the command prompt window here, this being the prompt, the flashing cursor, we want to type the ping test command. Now, in my geographic location in Ireland, I'm going to ping the local National News Corporation, RTE. They have websites, television channels, etc. And to do a ping test to RTE, I need to know the website address. In your situation, you will probably want to pick a local, whether it be news or any sort of business that you can decide on the website address that you know is going to be hosted locally. That website exists in your locale, in your country. So I type the word ping, then a space, then www.rte.ie, which is the website address for RTE. And then I'm going to, just at the end, put in a space and a dash or a minus T. Now that's an optional step, but I like to do it for a speed test or troubleshooting a slow internet connection problem, which is what we're discussing here. Once I've typed that command in, I can press enter, and here you see the ping test running. Now, just to interpret the results for those who are unfamiliar with this, this is my computer sending a request to the rte.ie website, which is just any website that's in my locale. It's in my country of Ireland. And it's going to continue to run that test indefinitely. That's what the dash T at the end here is. And the only thing we're interested in is that we're getting results, we're getting replies, okay? And they're going to just keep going and going and going because the test will run indefinitely. And the only column here that we're interested in is the time column. And what that is that's the amount of time it takes for the request to go from my computer here to the server where the rte.ie website is being hosted and back to my computer. It's a round trip, and this is a packet of data going out, packet of data coming back, and how long did that take. And you can see here that the times do fluctuate, but they are all low tens, maybe into the high teens at worst. And I have quite a good internet connection, thankfully, here. And the website that I've chosen, rt.ie, is hosted close by. And that means that the amount of time it takes for the request to go out and return back to me is quite low. You'll see different results here, depending on the site you choose and depending on your home internet connection and a number of other factors. The only thing you need to be concerned about is if this number here, this milliseconds number in the time column, is anything over maybe 50 milliseconds, consistently over 50 milliseconds. Wired connections are better than wireless connections. So if you're using wireless or Wi-Fi and you're noticing that the response times here are high, try temporarily switching to a wired connection. Repeat the test, deal with that problem as you see fit. You can look into the option of Wi-Fi extenders, power line adapters. These are things that you can type into Google and learn more about, and they may help in that situation. If you notice that the times here in the ping test are good, as in they are low numbers and consistently low numbers, as you're seeing here, but every once in a while, instead of getting a reply, you get request timed out. What that means is that the packet of data that left my computer went out, maybe didn't get very far, and no response was received to that request. Or the packet of data got all the way from my computer to the server where rte.ie is being hosted, and then the return never got to my computer. And it timed out. It waited long enough and it said, okay, I've had enough of this. Forget that test, let's move on and do another one. And in that situation, you'll get a request timed out here. One or two of those in maybe 50 or 100 tests is fine. That's a small amount of what's called packet loss. But that shouldn't cause a massive problem. Any packets that are lost will just be sent again or requested again and then sent back. And that's fine. That shouldn't cause an issue. But a number of tests that all show requests timed out in a row means your internet connection basically dropped out or slowed to such a degree that the tests failed because of it. And this is a common issue with Wi-Fi connections that have some sort of interference taking place. That interference can be your router being beside the microwave and someone's making pizza rolls. Or it's Christmas and you've decided in your infinite wisdom to wrap the router cables in Christmas tree lights. These sorts of things cause what's called electromagnetic interference, which can kill a wireless connection. So look around. Is there anything between your computer and where your Wi-Fi comes from? That will be the router or modem usually provided by your internet service provider. If there is, bring the computer closer. Test again. As I speak, you see a request timed out. I'm going to stop this test by doing a Control and C, same keyboard shortcut as copy, and you can see the results here. My computer sent out 260 requests and it received back 259 and it lost one. I'm fine with that. That'll do for me. Going back to what I was saying about interference on wireless connections, if you're using a computer that has wireless, it's more than likely a laptop. Bring it closer to the router, test from there, see if the test yields different results. If so, again, wireless repeaters or access points or range extenders, whatever name you want to give them, or potentially some power line adapters. Power line adapters are a very powerful tool that a lot of people don't know about, but basically they will transmit your internet connection through the electrical wiring of your property. Be wary if using them in an apartment block or flats, and also your mileage may vary depending on the quality of the electrical wiring in your home. But I personally use them and I find them fantastic. So they're worth looking into, and they're not very expensive either, which is the good thing. So with all of that said, we're going to leave it there for today. That's just some tips and some information on how to troubleshoot what is perceived to be a slowness problem with your computer. Quick recap: Task Manager, great place to start, particularly the Performance tab for those of you on Windows 10 or Windows 11 that have it. Check your CPU usage. Check your uptime while you're here. Do you need a restart? Also check your memory usage and make sure there's no runaway processes taking up all your precious CPU power and leaving you with nothing. The next step is to check for startup processes. So again, Task Manager and the Startup tab, or Windows key and R and msconfig for anyone on an older version of Windows. In the Startup tab, you'll see what is starting when your computer starts. Anything you're unsure of, leave it enabled. Anything you think you know what it is and you don't think you want to start when your computer starts, uncheck the box, click OK, reboot your computer when prompted. You can then check that you're still able to do what you need to do on the computer, and your startup might be a bit quicker, and the general performance of your computer can also be quicker because there are less background processes running using up those precious resources. So the last thing we covered was a slow internet connection, which can appear to be a slow computer problem. Your best course of action here is to run a ping test, and in my locale, as mentioned, of Ireland, rte.ie is a website hosted close to where I live, and I am running a ping test to that website terminally forever, and that's the -t here at the end. You type that command, you press enter, and you leave it run for a little bit. Okay, you can then interpret the results being the time column, or whenever you see a request timed out. As I said, I saw one request time out in 260 requests, so that's fine, and it shouldn't cause a major problem. But a lot of requests timing out, especially all in a row, means there's an issue. Your internet service provider can also help, and it's a good thing to contact them with some background technical knowledge or having performed some troubleshooting yourself. So one thing I've advised a lot of people to do is to contact their internet service provider and ask them to change the Wi-Fi channel. The Wi-Fi channel is, just think of it like a TV channel. You have RTE is on number 1, or BBC is on number 3 or 4, whatever it is. If there was another channel that was being broadcast on number 1, then those two channels will conflict and it will give some sort of an issue. Wi-Fi signals work in a similar way. You'll probably have a lot of neighbors who also have their own Wi-Fi networks. All those networks can step on each other's toes if they're all using the same or similar channels. Your internet service provider should be able to help you, or even change the channel for you and give your Wi-Fi network more bandwidth, more room to breathe, so that it doesn't have other Wi-Fi networks stepping all over it and ruining its happy times. So hope some of that helped some of you out there. As I said, if you're unsure of anything as you go through this troubleshooting process, pop a comment below. I'll get back to as many of you as I possibly can. And best of luck. Good luck.